was amusement park, and that was their honeymoon. Came back the same day. That was the trick or treat, we used to say to them, you know. And for their honeymoon, they went to on a trolley car from Bethlehem to Philadelphia. The immigrant family who was trying to become really Americanized and improve their standard of living. So it was an experience I'll never forget. It left an impression on me. And instead of making that left on the tracks, it got off the track and went into our living room. I lost my balance and went over the porch and landed on my left wrist and broke my wrist, both bones there, and I ended up in a cast. This was 3 weeks after I began my dental practice. This was the original marketplace where farmers from the area brought their crops in, and they had stalls and stands in there, and a family by the name of Riches, an Italian family, who were some of the occupants of some of the stalls. They were funny. They had loud voices, and they'd be husking their products, you know, and it was you'd always go in there, you'd hear a Rich's voice in the background. But anyway, not only was it a farmer's market, but there was a hall on the second floor, and many of the ceremonies, weddings, and other community affairs were held in this hall. And Grandpa Mars and Grandma Rosie were married there in 1905. Grandpa Mars had come from Philadelphia. He was fixed up with Grandma Rosie. It was what we call in Yiddish a shotgun, and it was a fixed wedding. And fortunately, it worked out fine. They were married for many, many years. But anyway, they were married upstairs on Halloween. And we used to tease them a lot about that. We used to tell them, you know, it was a Halloween trick or treat, we used to say to them, you know. And for their honeymoon, they went to on a trolley car from Bethlehem to Philadelphia to Willow Grove Park. It was amusement park, and that was their honeymoon. came back the same day. That was it. But anyway, they were married in 1905, and shortly afterwards, Grandpa had a little secondhand furniture store. We're going to get to that, at the corner of Broadhead and Broadway. And the property was owned by Grandma Rosie's father, Nathan Kaplan, and I assume they paid rent to him and so forth. Broadhead Avenue, right at the corner of Broadway and Broadhead Avenue. This is where Grandpa Morris had his first little furniture store here. I guess it was mostly secondhand furniture and so forth. And Grandma and Grandpa lived upstairs, and they opened up this store probably shortly after they got married in 1905. And as I said, Aunt Mildred was born while they were occupying this location. And they stayed here for approximately, I would say, 3 years or so, or maybe a little less. And from here, they moved up to Graham's Court, which we will shortly see. It's a little alley, and that was sort of an upgrade, I guess, at that time. And so Grandpa Kaplan, which was Grandma Rosie's father, owned this property, and I suppose the rent was very nominal, and they were able to manage until they progressed beyond this store. And so that's the extent of this location here. And I suppose it gave them a good start. And that's it. Well, after living on Broadhead and Broadway after their marriage in 1905, they, as you know, they had a little secondhand furniture store there on Broadhead Avenue. And I guess with little thrift and so forth, they accumulated a little money, because the one on Broadhead Avenue was really Grandpa Kaplan's property, and they rented an apartment upstairs and the store downstairs space. And then they went up in the world a little bit. They moved to Graham's Court, which we are now right in front of. And this is where Uncle Nat was born. Now, Aunt Mildred was born, as we said before, on Broadhead Avenue. So the second child, Nat or Nathaniel, was born here, and they lived here for several years, and there were only a few blocks eventually from the 3rd Street store, which was purchased in the meantime. And of course, that's where two of the other siblings were born. That is Bernie and Zizzy, or Sylvia. And so I suppose they only lived here a few years. And as they were progressing, as Grandpa being a new immigrant to this country, he was learning the American way, and he tried to step up. And so they moved, as I said, from Broadhead Avenue to Graham's Court. And we will see subsequently where else they moved. Well, here we are, standing in front of 217 East 3rd Street, which became the home of M. Glazier Furniture for many, many years, until in the 70s, when, as I said before, illness and Grandpa passed away and Uncle Bernie's health failed, and they decided to sell to the Bethlehem Steel for a measly, if I remember correctly, I think they got $28,000 for the building. Wow, that was, Bethlehem Steel always got bargains. They wore you down until they got a miserly figure for the property, and that was their technique, unfortunately. As much as they did for the community, this was one of the negatives. Anyway, the store was here, and as soon as they moved here, I would say probably in 1910, approximately, so maybe 11. They moved here, and things really start going well. Grandpa worked hard. Grandma was, as you said, Scotty, Grandma was usually pregnant at that time. There were 5 kids born to Morris and Rosie, so you know that's a good bet that she was pregnant. And they lived upstairs above the store, and Grandma always said she was always busy, either washing clothes or washing diapers, helping in the store. When Grandpa would get in his horse and wagon and make deliveries, Grandma would have to stay in the store. I can't visualize her as a furniture sales lady because she wasn't very aggressive, but I'm sure they managed, and things progressed very nicely. And Uncle Bernie and Uncle Bernie and Aunt Sylvia, your grandmother, were born here, and things were fine. And they lived here until approximately, until about 1920, right after World War I. They made another move, and this was another upgrade. This was a immigrant family who was trying to become really Americanized and improve their standard of living, and they did. With each move, they improved it, and they moved up to Broadway, which we will see subsequently. Let's see, what else can I say about that? Things, as I said, things progressed. They start hiring more people, and it became a very important furniture outlet in the city of Bethlehem on the south side. And as I told Scott, on Saturday nights when I was a little boy, you couldn't walk on 3rd Street without bumping into people. You'd think you were in Times Square in New York. You might find that hard to believe, but you got to remember that all the early immigrants and the early employees of Bethlehem Steel lived on the south side, and they did their shopping once every 2 weeks because that's when Bethlehem Steel paid. They paid on a Thursday, Friday of every second week. And so business existed for those Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of every second week. That's when the business exploded. In between, sometimes it was a little slow, but those 3 days were packed in a lot of retail business in that period. So it was interesting. It was very interesting. This is the approximate area. As you can see, it is now a parking lot where Jake and Bessie Thomas, that's Scott's great-grandmother and grandfather on the Thomas side, her grandfather's parents, had their famous kosher deli. It was the only kosher delicatessen in Bethlehem, and it was very successful. It had the usual run of all the things, lots of corned beef and pastrami and lox and bagels and rye bread and the Yiddish newspaper. Your grandfather used to get a couple copies of the Yiddish newspaper, their Forwärts, which was the most famous one at the time. And you could always see your grandfather when he wasn't busy sitting there reading the Yiddish newspaper. And he always had his long white coat on, you know, as he sliced the lox and so forth. And it was a real institution. We used to go in there to get our Hamantaschen for Purim. Now on Passover, I don't believe they used to make the store prepare it for Passover, kosher for Pesach, because there were a lot of customers, there were a lot of non-Jewish customers that used to come there. You know, the Bethlehem Steel offices was right down in the next block. So the people who loved kosher deli, the Gentile people, would come in there and they patronized them probably as much as the Jewish people. And so he was kept busy. And so I think that's why they never really made the store really kosher for Pesach. But it was a famous place, and everybody went to Jake and Bessie's for, mainly Jake. I think Bessie was more or less involved more with they had a little store over on Wood Street, which you will also see subsequently. And he ran a good shop, And eventually it got too much for him, and he sold it to Ben and Blanche Snyder, who were real characters, and that was Clarence Snyder's aunt and uncle. That's your great aunt. No, that would be your great aunt and uncle, Clarence and Sylvia Snyder. And he sold it to Ben and Bessie and Blanche. And as I said, they were real characters.